This is an extract from the Leader Coronavirus Daily podcast by the Evening Standard and hosted by me, David Marsland. To hear the whole thing, search for it on your podcast provider. The Office of the US National Intelligence Director almost never comments on ongoing work, but last night it issued a statement saying COVID-19 is not man-made or genetically modified. It also doesn't know where the virus came from. Most scientists think it started in animals. The statement came out of the blue. Perhaps they were expecting something, because a few hours later, Donald Trump told a press conference he'd seen evidence China had the disease in a Wuhan lab and may have let it out deliberately.
My question is, have you seen anything at this point that gives you a high degree of confidence that the Wuhan Institute of Virology was the origin of this virus?
Yes, I have. Yes, I have.
And what gives you a high degree of confidence that this originated from the Wuhan Institute of Virology?
I can't tell you that. I'm not allowed to tell you that.
Why would China do that? Donald Trump says Beijing doesn't want him re-elected. So just to break that down, Donald Trump is suggesting China may have created a disease and released it to the world to stop Donald Trump winning the November vote in the US. Well, joining me now is US politics expert Dr Rubrick Biegon from Kent University. And Dr Biegon, how much of this is about China and how much is it about persuading his supporters to vote for him again?
Yeah, I think the vast majority of it is about the domestic political situation in the United States. I mean, Trump has been aware of the recent polling data that's come out, which suggests that, he's kind of slipping, he's losing this kind of very brief bounce that he had in some of his approval ratings. So when COVID-19 really became a national issue in the US in March, Trump did see a kind of marginal increase in his overall approval ratings. And that's been slipping the last few weeks as the crisis has deepened in the United States. And Trump is aware of this. There's been reporting on this that his advisors, his political advisors have kind of showed him some internal polling that they've done that suggests that this bump is starting to fade. And so I think that the decisions he's making now are really focused mainly on the kind of electoral context in regards to 2020, much more so than China itself. And this is consistent with what we've seen from Trump over the past 3 years. When he talks about foreign policy, he's talking mainly to a domestic audience. And a kind of slice of that domestic audience, he's speaking mainly to his support base rather than the kind of nation as a whole. And that's something that I think is different about Trump as compared to previous presidents.
One thing I thought was really interesting about the press conference last night was when Donald Trump claimed that he had seen evidence that COVID-19 is an engineered virus. And that completely contradicts his own intelligence service, who says there's no evidence for that. But then Trump has always tried to set up this battle between him and the deep state, hasn't he? Which his base kind of laps up.
Yeah, that's right. And I think this is where it's important to kind of distinguish Trump, the individual, from Trump, the administration. And there are different actors, there's different things going on. And I think with Trump, the individual, he's this kind of populist actor. He's framing things in a particular way, which may make it more difficult for the kind of political message to reach certain audiences within the United States. But again, that's not necessarily what he's trying to do here. I think he's sort of speaking mainly to his base. And so when you have this kind of inconsistency where he's saying one thing about where the virus may have originated and, officials in his administration are saying something else, that sort of gives the message some incoherence. But for his supporters, they're really focused on what he's saying, not necessarily what his intelligence officials are saying. So there's a kind of trade-off here politically, because it makes it more difficult for Trump to reach a kind of independent swing audience in the kind of middle of American politics. But that's not necessarily what he's trying to do. I think he's sort of sticking with what he's done over the previous 3.5 years, and then he's sort of speaking mainly to the people who already support him. And the fact that there's some inconsistencies there with what he's saying and what others in the administration are saying, that won't hurt him on that front.
No, and if Donald Trump can kind of plausibly make this case to his base that he's not to blame in any way for what's happened with COVID-19 in the States and the number of people who have been infected and the number of people who have died, then that's going to make it really hard for the Democrats, for Joe Biden, to make a dent in his popularity, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, we've seen from Biden already that I think part of Biden's electoral strategy moving forward will be to kind of almost try and run to Trump's right in some ways on China. So Biden released this ad that sort of was suggesting that Trump had, made a mistake in trusting Chinese authorities, and was sort of suggesting in some ways that Biden would be tougher on China than Trump would be. I don't know how well that'll play. I mean, I think that part of the problem here for the Democrats is that still sort of keeps the overall message on China rather than on Trump's response or the administration's response. And so this is where I think some of the outlandish things that Trump says, although I don't know that it's part of a deliberate political strategy on his part, I think it may be more of a kind of impulse in how he kind of handles the sort of media narrative. It's hard for people to understand that actually could work to Trump's advantage. This kind of conspiracy theory around the origins of the virus. It sort of prevents the media from really digesting or kind of analyzing the failures in the administration's overall response to the pandemic. It kind of keeps the narrative overall on the issue of China. I mean, it makes it difficult for Democrats to really kind of hammer home the problems in the administration's response at the federal level if the discussion is kind of constantly on, where the virus originated in China.
It must be so frustrating for the Democrats and journalists in America too, when so much of what Donald Trump says is not true, and yet it's incredibly hard to get fact out.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, we'll see. I mean, I think, as I was saying before, I think that we have seen a slight decline in Trump's overall approval rating, including among independent voters. But you're right that the Democrats will have a kind of challenge, I think, moving forward in trying to kind of break through and really kind of keep the overall focus on what the administration did or didn't do in response to the pandemic, rather than the kind of sort of thinking about how it relates back to China and that kind of thing.
Search for the Leader Coronavirus Daily on any podcast provider to hear more from the podcast.